Ah, it's Amazon delivery day. Stuff for the solar. We ordered it all together, so it should come all together. We got bus bars, six post bus bars. And that is peach shortcake I was in the middle of making when the delivery guy came. This is the Victron shunt we already have on the A-liner, so we got the main battery disconnect. We got the disconnect for other things. I just ordered that just cause I'm not sure where I'm going to put it, but I know I'm going to need one somewhere. Real copper wire, a whole bunch of 8 gauge, which is kind of small, but we're not going to be running anything big off these wires. And then we've got fuses and fuse holders, and we're going to fuse to the wires. The wires are 8 gauge. They can only handle 60 amp, so we're going to have 60 amp fuses. Technically, we could start installing. And getting ready for the battery, which is supposed to come Tuesday. It's Sunday today. But I don't know the size of the battery dimension-wise. The battery is a 300 amp hour Wise battery, which I've had really good luck with my Wise battery and the A-liner. It's done me well. It's got good capacity and it's got good BMS and everything. And Weiss makes a 300 amp hour battery, so it's 3 times the size, and it has a 200 amp hour BMS, while most of the 300 amp hour batteries that I've looked at have a 100 amp hour BMS. That means they just took the BMS from a 100 amp hour battery, put it on that oversized battery, and I wanted a larger BMS just in case we want to run the air conditioning. We might wire it up for air conditioning. We're definitely going to wire it up with an inverter to run some of the outlets, but that'll be a bigger wire than 8 gauge. It'll probably be a 4 gauge. Stay tuned. It's time to install the battery. Ugh. This is my new lithium iron phosphate battery. As some of you might know, I put a lithium iron phosphate battery in the A-liner last year, and this year I rewired it. I put an inverter on it so I could run my computer, which takes an awful lot of power. It's a 300 watt power brick on the computer, so it takes a lot of power, and so I can only use it for about an hour at night. This is a 300 amp hour lithium iron phosphate. It is a Wise battery. It's the same battery that I bought for the A-liner. I think they're the cheapest. I got a link down below. But this is 300 amp hours versus my 100 amp hour Wise battery in my A-liner. The 100 amp hour is a direct replacement for your regular 12 volt lead acid battery. You can drop it right in the box, hook it up, and it works just fine. You do need to change the charger, which I've changed the charger in this the Wolf Pup. Since I'm using 300 amp hours, I don't want it to be at 85-90%. I really like these people. The one thing I like about them is they do have all the temperature protection, high and low temperature. 2 of these is the equivalent of 6. So I may do that. If I want to run the air conditioning off the batteries, I'll need 2 of these. And it's real easy to hook them up. With Wise, I'm convinced that these are better batteries for size. They're built up for the size they are. So I really like them. If you want to buy these from my link, I've asked them if I could be an affiliate because I do like their batteries, And they've said that yes, you buy a battery with my link and they'll give you a discount, and I'll get a commission from that. So this is going to go under the bed. We're going to put it right here, and the battery in the camera is blinking, so I'm going to die in a minute. So stay tuned, and we'll be hooking this up and seeing how it works. Well, hello folks. I was going to show you my battery install, but as I'm trying to work on the batteries and all the wiring and everything like that, the battery goes under the bed, and the bed lifts up like this, and it's a real nice setup. But unfortunately, being under there with tools, with components and lighting and everything, I kept kicking over the camera, and it was just too crowded, so I couldn't really show you all the installs. And it's pretty basic, so I'll show you what I did and explain to you how the battery is installed, because I think that's all you really need to know anyways. You don't need to know how to run a screw into a board, right? So let me show you. Everybody move over. All right, there's the boy with the ball. He's jumping out of the thing, but here's the battery, and it's put in with a little frame to hold it in place and a ratchet strap that attaches it to the wall. And I put in this plywood board. This is a 3/4 inch plywood, so I had a screw base to put everything in. And the first thing I did, which wasn't really necessary, was I put in this disconnect switch, which I wanted to be on the outside. I don't want to have to pick up the bed to get the disconnect switch on the battery to work. So the wiring comes in through that plywood and goes to the battery, and it's got a big fuse there. Right now I'm only using a 60 amp fuse, because I can't imagine that I need more than 60 amps the way it's set up for now. 60 amps at 12 volts is pretty significant. In this space right here, I will be putting an inverter. I haven't decided whether I'm going to just steal the one out of the A-liner, which is a small 600 watt inverter, or whether I'm going to put a bigger 2000 watt inverter that will run some more appliances. But everything is hooked up through bus bars. So that's the positive bus bar, and that's the negative bus bar. And again, those are just screwed into the back of the plywood. And the plywood is put up by really just 2 screws on this joist and 2 screws on that joist. So if I ever sell the trailer and somebody doesn't want to pay for solar panels and solar install, that whole board just unscrews with 4 screws, and it's gone. So that's one way of looking at it. And the battery is so the battery, all the battery goes through the disconnect switch, except you'll see 2 wires coming off there, except for the charge controller. The charge controller battery comes over directly to the battery, because if you turn off the charge controller with the battery switch and the solar panels are on, you do damage to the charge controller. So the solar charge controller has to be on its own. And we put the solar charge controller in there. There's the solar charge controller, and it's working, as you can see. And we brought in a disconnect for the solar panels, and the solar panel wires are snaked up through the wall here. And this is pretty interesting. If you look, you can see the joist there, and that joist is the joist that holds the awning on the outside. So between the wall and that joist, there's about a 6-inch channel that I can get up to the top of the roof to put wires through. But even that doesn't really work, and I'll show you what I did there. But we do have the battery and the solar panels wired in. Right now they're working because this is a little out of order. But and then the gray wire here is the monitor panel for this charge controller, which, just in my opinion, is a pretty big waste of time and money. I can't see it because it's kind of dark and it doesn't really tell you anything. This thing up here that comes off the negative, this is the black negative terminal of the battery. Positive and negative. And this, again, this is a 300 amp hour battery, so it's huge. It's a lot bigger than your typical 100 amp hour battery, and typically people take 100 amp hour batteries and chain them together so that they are either 100 amp hours at 24 volts or 36 volts. And I just bought a 300 amp hour 12 volt battery, no wiring, and it's got a BMS for 200 amp hours, so it'll actually push out or accept 200 amp hours, so I like that. The positive wire goes to the positive bus bar, and everything else will attach through that positive bus bar. If I have other things I want to power, like an inverter or some fans or a heater or something like that, it would all go through that. And you don't connect to the battery. The bus bar works much better, and the battery is controlled by the on-off switch, so that whole bus bar can be turned on and off at once. Now the negative goes to a shunt, and a shunt is something that tells you how much power goes in and out. Now this is DC current, so it's actually a flow of electrons versus AC current, which is kind of like a vibration of electrons. The electrons go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, while with DC current it's a complete movement of electrons through the wire. So it's that little shunt there tells me about how much electricity we've used, how much we're taking in, how much we're putting out. It's all the great information that you really want to know about your battery, what the level of the battery charge is, how long it'll last. And that's the Victron shunt, and it runs about $150 to $180 depending on which one you get. You can get the cheapest one because there's no difference to them unless you put it on the outside of the rig. But that's a really nice addition, and I'll show you the screen. It's Bluetooth. It comes Bluetooth just like that, but it only works about 20 feet from that shunt on Bluetooth. You have to put a Bluetooth transmitter on it if you want it to go very far at all. And you can actually make it Wi-Fi so that it connects to the internet and you can get information on your batteries from far away. Okay, so this is the app on my phone for the Victron shunt, and you can see I've got the A-liner and the Wolf Pup, both with shunts. So we'll click on the Wolf Pup shunt, and since it's close enough because it's right there, it works outside the pup. It tells you that right now the battery is 100%, and because it's 100%, the solar panels are only putting in a quarter of an amp. But you see it's a positive number, which means it's adding power into the unit. Let me see if I can turn on the furnace. Okay, we turned on the furnace, and you can see it went to negative, and that's just the fan in the furnace. Actually, I got the propane turned off, so I don't think it'll do anything more. But see, the furnace really pulls over 3 amps, and the solar is catching that. It's early morning in the day, so the solar panels aren't collecting as much sunlight as they could be. But you see the battery is 100%, and that gives resistance, and the charge controller won't let it go above 100%. But you know, we got 10 days of power to run, and there's the sun just went away behind a cloud. So now we're pulling the full power from the battery, and that's solar. You know, it continues to change. But that's the pretty neat little app, and it does have up at the top. It has a history button that shows you, you know, what you've gotten over the time. I've only discharged this one time since last full discharge, a month. And then there's some cute little graphs and trends if you want to see that. Some graphs on how much you're charging and how much you're using and all that. But that's the Victron shunt app. And then from the bus bar, I ran a wire down through the floor to get to the 12-volt panel of the trailer. Now you remember the battery used to be on the tongue, and I was hoping that maybe the battery wires from the original tongue just ran along the floor, but they run beneath the floor along the frame. So I ran that wire out, hooked it in. I split the wire under the frame and tied it in with a fuse. I put one of these fuses in the wire. Since it's outside and it's exposed, I took one of those and put the new wire. I just attached the new wire to one end and the regular wire and just split the wire like that. So it's just a T now, and that works real well. No problems with the wiring. For the negative, I had to do a similar thing. That had to go down through the floor, and that's attached to the frame of the camper. And somehow you got to know that the actual power panel is way down there. Next, that's the furnace you see first, and then the power panel is just beyond that. But it's a long ways, and I didn't want to run wires, so I just tapped into the wires that were already run. And it's kind of interesting in that I'm using, this is an 8-gauge wire, this is a 8-gauge wire, and this is a 6-gauge wire, because that's what the trailer uses. In fact, I think the trailer uses 10-gauge for most of its 12-volt wiring. And I guess that's because they don't expect you to use much load. We upsized the cables a little bit, and if we put in a large inverter, we'll have to upsize these cables again, because the inverter will definitely draw too much power. But anyways, that's the wiring on the board. And then let me show you the solar cable wires. As I said, the solar cables went in the wall there, and they move up the wall along here, and that's the meter for the solar panels. And then they come up here. You can't go right off the corner because, of course, there's a big header here that you can't drill through. So I had to come out of the wall and then go back up through the ceiling to the roof, and that's where we have the gland for the solar panel. That's my new clock. I wanted to have a clock that told me what the temperature and the time of day was and all that, so when Akila wakes me up in the middle of the night, I'll know what time it is. So in the whole thing, it doesn't take up very much room in the storage area. It gets all that weight of the battery off the tongue, so I got a slightly lighter tongue. Of course, I have added an extra propane tank, so I took 65 pounds off the tongue and added 38. And I put up these boards. That's where all my water system is back in there, and I put up doors so I could keep them separate. I just added a 2x4, and it's routed so it's a big channel inside. There's only really about this much wood. I just took a dado blade on my table saw and cut a big channel underneath it. We'll finish up with the solar install, the good part of that done, and then we'll be ready to go camping. Okay, folks, So that's how I wired everything up. But something I learned as I put all this stuff in there and got it all together is that I originally, pretend this is my camper and this is the air conditioning. This is the front of the camper. Originally, I was going to put the two 200-watt panels like that and have 440 watts, and then I might be able to put another panel here and another panel over here of 100-watt panels. And as I measured and tested and looked at ways to do it, I decided I could put 2 panels this way, leave this one here, and put 2 panels here, one here and one up here. And so I've increased my output. Oh, there goes the air conditioner. I've increased my output to 660 watts from 420, which is great, except the solar controller specifications say that it's maxed out at 520 watts. So 660 is a pretty big jump from that, roughly 25% more. But talking to a lot of people on the internet, they use that same charge controller. That's an EP Ever 40 amp charge controller. That they run that up to 1,000 watts of power. So it is possible to over panel, they call it, your charge controller. And the reason for that is because it's very rare that you get all the power out of your panels. A 200-watt panel may never see more than 140 watts. So you have to figure that factor into what the charge controller is really going to use. And if it's going to see the full 1,000 watts, it might just shut down. It'll protect itself. So that's something I had to consider in putting more panels on the... So when I get this all paneled up like this, so I may still have room for a 100-watt panel here or an 80-watt panel here, and I'll definitely have room for another panel in here. Now this is where my vent caps are and my fan, so I've got a little space here but not a lot. And you got to have space to stand on the roof. With these 2 panels here, there's hardly any space to stand on the roof. This is the refrigerator vent over here. If I put more panels on the roof, I'll have to add another charge controller. Your panels should match going into one charge controller. They should all be 100 amp or 200 amp, 300 amp. You can't have a 350, a 100, and a 80 panel all going into the same charge controller, because the 80-watt panel will limit the charge controller to take in the power from all the other panels. So something I learned in the last month. So anyways, I hope you got something out of that. We'll be continually building this up. Thanks for watching. Leave me questions, comments if you want, and we'll respond to them. We always respond to comments. If I'm on the road, it might take me a whole day. Most of the time I get them within 20 to 30 minutes. So we'll see you on the road. Be safe. Bye-bye.